Welcome everyone to Starting a Business in Virginia. I'm Erin Zacher-Manchin, Programming Coordinator for Loudoun County Public Library and your host tonight. Please feel free to share your questions and comments with me by typing them in the chat box, and I can relay them to our speaker. Please know that all attendees will be off camera and muted throughout the program. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Melanie Hammelman, owner of Hammelman Law, PLLC, a law firm dedicated to estate planning and business formation and planning. Melanie is a resident of Loudoun County and enjoys helping other locals with their legal planning needs. And with that, I will pass it on to you, Melanie.
Thanks so much, Erin. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie. Like Erin said, I live in Loudoun County. I actually got my start in business formation and business planning, and then sort of segued into estate planning also, which some of you may have seen me listed as a presenter maybe a few weeks ago for an estate planning seminar also. Anyhow, we will get into today we will sort of go over the basics. You're only going to see my face for a little bit, and then we're going to start the presentation here. But today we're going to go over sort of the basics of business formation and business planning, some things that you want to think about when you're forming your business, and then some other things that you want to think about when you're actually running it. So with that, I will go ahead and start sharing my presentation with you. And let's go ahead and play this slideshow. All right, and Erin, if at any point you see that y'all are not seeing the whole presentation, that all you're seeing is my screen itself, just holler at me and let me know. Okay, so business in Virginia. I actually am licensed in Virginia and Maryland both. I primarily work in Virginia, but I have also helped people either set up their business in Maryland or at least do a foreign qualification, which is what you want to do if you're working in Virginia and Maryland both. What is business planning? Business planning includes tons of things. It includes everything from forming the business itself to preparing your contracts and making sure that those are in order for either customers or for other businesses, hiring employees, hiring independent contractors. Employees versus independent contractors is a big thing where sometimes people get a little tripped up, that we're going to talk a little bit about today. Filing for a trademark. Also, I get a lot of people that come to me and they say, I want to set up my own business. I filed something online. I think I set it up right. I'm not sure. I've been in business for a long time for other people, but I'm not sure how to go about starting my own business. That's totally normal. I knew how to start my own business because that's what I do. But even I have had attorneys come to me who, one of my best friends from law school is a trademark attorney. She had no idea how to start her own business. She doesn't do business law. She doesn't work on business formation. So she came to me and had me help her set her business up. So even attorneys don't know what to do sometimes. So now we're going to go over sort of your new business checklist. What to do first? Okay, so the first thing is come up with a name, right? That seems simple. The Virginia State Corporation Commission, or the Virginia FCC, is where you want to go to check that out. A lot of people have an idea of what they want in their head, and then they go to file it and it's not distinctive. So basically what that means is if you want to be Real Estate LLC and somebody already has Real Estate Properties LLC, the Virginia State Corporation Commission is not going to let you register that. So you're going to have to pick something that's distinctive, something that is not similar to what other people have. Another thing you want to think about is e-filing. Virginia does sometimes charge more to e-file. They have tried to get away from that, especially in this pandemic time, or at least the tail end of the pandemic. They're trying to get away from additional fees for e-filing. But you will have to file with the Virginia State Corporation Commission, either for corporate formation documents or LLC formation documents. We will sort of get into what that filing entails in a little bit. You also need to file with the IRS. So that would be your employer identification number, your EIN. Basically, the first thing you do is you get your name filed, and then the second thing you need to do is get that EIN. Virginia tax ID is something that you want to think about doing also, but usually you can use your federal employer ID number as your Virginia tax ID number as well. That's how I have my own set up as well. Foreign qualification. This is sort of what I was talking about at the very beginning. So like for me, I am licensed in Virginia and Maryland as an attorney. That doesn't mean I can just do business in Virginia and Maryland though. So I had to file my LLC. I filed it in Virginia because that's where I live. And if I wanted to do business in Maryland, then I knew I would have to file what's called a foreign qualification. Foreign just means outside the state. So anyone who's outside the state of Virginia or Commonwealth of Virginia, or anyone who's outside the state of Maryland, or anyone who's outside the state of Texas. I'm from Texas, so I always use Texas as an example. Anyone who's from outside that state, if you want to do business there, you have to file a foreign qualification for that. County business license. So some things like general contractors, other, licensed and bonded services have to apply for a county license. Attorneys do not. A lot of contractors do not, things like that, or government contractors do not, but things like electricians and general contractors and things like that, you do need to have a county business license. Home occupancy permit. I used to get this one all the time, questions about this all the time whenever I was working at a larger firm. We had a lot of people coming in saying they wanted to start a home baking business. I don't know why the home baking, but tons of them. Home baking businesses, they all wanted to work out of their house. So for that, you have to have a home occupancy permit. You have to say, not only that you're working out of your home, but especially for perishables, for food goods, you have to have your kitchen come checked to make sure that it's that the standards of cleanliness are acceptable to the county as well. Quitclaim deeds. Okay, so this is mostly for people who are setting up a business for rental properties. You've got to title and I will rehash this again later because it's so important for people who are doing rental properties. You have to have the properties titled in the name of the LLC. So a lot of times what happens is you start your business, but you purchased the property in your individual name either before you started the business or you didn't know how to put it in the name of the business when you bought it. So that's definitely something you want to deal with for reasons that we will get to on this slide. And Erin, if I'm going too fast at any point, or if people are saying that, that they're not able to catch what I'm saying, please feel free to hop in and slow me down.
Sure, I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks. So operating agreement, bylaws, and shareholder agreement. Okay, these are three separate documents needed for different purposes. But basically, depending on the type of business you have. So if you have an LLC, you're going to be looking at the operating agreement. If you have a corporation, whether it's an S corporation or a C corporation, you're going to be looking at bylaws and a shareholder agreement. These are the documents that tell you what to do if something happens. So you have a dispute with your business partner or partners. You have a contract that goes wrong with one of your vendors. You have a client that's unhappy about something and wants to file suit. You start losing money instead of making money, and you don't know how to split the losses between yourself and the partner or partners. This or these. If you have a corporation, you actually need to have bylaws and a shareholder agreement. this is where you go to figure out what to do. This is sort of your answer book. So if you have a question about how anything will be handled, even about what the salaries will look like, if there is profit splitting, if there's profit sharing, these are the kinds of things that you'll look at. You also want to go over what happens if any of the shareholders or members of the corporation or LLC respectively are either incapacitated or pass away. A business plan. So business plan is not totally necessary. So like I don't have a business plan. I'm not planning on bringing on any associates. I'm not planning on bringing any investors in. Attorneys actually can't have investors, but that's a whole other thing. But if you are a small contracting company and you are trying to get a government contract awarded or even get a subcontract from a prime, then this is something that you definitely need to do. You need to lay out how your business is going to work and how you're going to scale it. So this is something where if you are going to bring on investors at any point in the future, you need to plan for it now. You need to go ahead and start figuring out how you're going to manage things like this as they come up. A lot of times, the businesses that are thinking about things like business plans, thinking about bringing on investors are corporations. Most of the time, they're corporations. An investor generally does not want to invest in an LLC. They will want a corporation. So you're going to want to think about how bringing in investors is going to affect the existing shares. So this is where your business plan would come in. It would sort of go over all of those issues. Insurance. Everybody needs insurance, right? Okay, we know that in our, I'm not sure what happened there. Well, we know that in our everyday life. We know that in for car insurance, insurance for your business also. You need an umbrella policy, which basically covers, if anyone files suit against you. If you have rental properties, you also need liability insurance and a key man policy. Okay, a key man policy, you really want to think about, again, if you've got a corporation, if you're making millions of dollars, because basically what happens is if you are the one person who is instrumental in running your entire business and then all of a sudden you aren't there, your business is probably going to suffer quite a bit. This key man insurance policy basically covers that. It covers what happens if the key man in your business is unable to continue to operate the business or continue to work. Trademark, again, not required. If you have a specific name or a specific logo that you want to save for your industry or for the goods and services that you're selling, and you want to keep it from your competitors, this is how to do it. You can also go back and if you can prove when you first started using the name or the logo, you can also say, oh, hey, I know I didn't file for this, and I know you've been, you filed for it already, but I've been using it longer. And you can actually even get your trademark registered just by having used it longer. All right. Titling assets. I told you I was going to come back to this. So all property, all accounts that belong to the business, everything needs to be in the business name. Otherwise, you're not doing yourself any favors and you're opening up all of your personal assets to liability. Basically, what that means is if somebody sues, say you have rental properties, if somebody sues you because somebody got hurt on one of your properties, then they could come after your personal home, your personal bank accounts, any of your personal assets, and nobody wants that. That's the whole reason we set up a company to begin with, or set up a business entity, So we want to make sure that we do everything we can to keep it isolated. So basically you want personal assets over here, business assets over here, and you don't want them to touch. The only thing that should be happening between them is your business can pay you, a salary, can pay you dividends, can pay you a percentage of profits, but you don't want personal accounts paying for business things. You don't want business accounts paying for personal things. You want to keep them totally separate. Okay, real property. This is what I said I was going to talk about earlier. If you have an LLC or really any kind of business that you're using for rental properties, I really encourage people to structure it so that each one of their properties is in a separate LLC. So in some states, they have what's called a series LLC. Virginia is currently trying to decide if they're going to allow a series LLC. Right now, they don't. What a series LLC is, it allows you to say, hey, I've got my operating agreement laid out already. I've got my articles of organization filed already, or my corporate formation docs filed already. I want to run all the businesses the same. They're all for the same purpose. I want to run them all the same. It's a great, great tool. My fingers are seriously crossed that Virginia allows this, because it's super helpful. It's actually one of the reasons why so many people say, didn't I form my business in Delaware? Because they were the first ones to do the series LLC. Nevada actually is a big front runner for business formation as well, because they have that also. Bank accounts, I just sort of went over this, but don't use your business bank account for personal stuff. Don't use your personal bank account for business stuff. If you, in the beginning, and I had to do this as well for my own firm, in the beginning, you generally have to contribute capital to your new business to, either buy equipment or, use it for things like web development and advertising and stuff like that. That's fine. You can contribute capital. You need to lay out in your operating agreement what that means. Are you paying it back to yourself? Are you going to pay yourself back for all the capital you've contributed? Is that just how you're getting your ownership interest in the business? So those are things that you want to cover in your operating agreement as well. Other assets, so equipment leases and things like that. So if you're leasing copiers, if you're leasing large machinery, things like that, anything that you're leasing, anything that you're buying, if you have a vehicle that's used only for business purposes, any of that stuff needs to be titled in the name of the business. All right, business formation. So now we're going to talk about actually setting it up. Why? Why do you need a business entity? Because it doesn't, this sort of goes back to what I said a minute ago, because it doesn't affect your personal assets. So you could certainly run a business as a sole proprietor. You can even file for a sole proprietorship on the Virginia SCC website. Don't. Spend the extra, I think it's extra $50 a year. Spend the $50 a year. It's totally worth it. It's worth it for peace of mind. It's worth it for, for your installation, for liability protection. Otherwise, what happens is anybody that you're interacting with, or anybody that interacts with anyone who is a part of your business, or any facility that your business works at, manages, owns, any of those people can file suit against you or the business and get to your personal assets if you haven't set up a separate business entity. Okay, what type of business? This is probably the biggest question that I get. What do I do? Do I file for an LLC? Do I file for an S corporation? Because these are the two most common that are talked about, and these are the two most common for a small business. So you can actually sort of have the best of both worlds, but it depends on what your purpose is. So like for myself, when Erin was introducing me earlier, she said Hammelman Law PLLC. So a PLLC is just a professional limited liability company. People like accountants, CPAs, things like that, doctors, dentists can all have what's called a professional limited liability company. Everybody else, you would just file for a limited liability company, an LLC. So generally speaking, there are a lot of similarities between the two. There are a few differences that will generally be the determining factors as far as whether you want to have an LLC or an S corporation. So first we'll go over the similarities. I know y'all, this is riveting stuff, but bear with me. I promise it's good information for anyone trying to figure out what to do with your business. Yeah.
I did have one question come through regarding that.
Let's hear it.
Are you going to have the PowerPoint available, or could you send it to me and I could make it available to them?
Sure. I don't see why not.
Okay, great. All right. So
I
yeah,
also generally have I have most of this information already on my website as well. Okay. But yeah, I don't see why I couldn't just have you, either have the slide deck or an outline posted.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if anyone wants me to email it to them directly, just send me your email in the chat and I can send it to you.
Yeah, and I also on the first screen and then again on the last screen, I'll have my contact information. I encouraged people to do the same thing whenever I did the estate planning. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have a question about something that was in the slides, like I didn't understand this, or I wrote this down, but now I don't know what it means. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great.
All right. So, and Erin, feel free to keep jumping in if people have a question that you think makes more sense to just go ahead and ask me while I'm talking, as opposed to saving till the end.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. So liability protection. This is what we talked about earlier, why you want to have that business entity, why you don't want to have a sole proprietorship, and you definitely want to have either a limited liability company or some sort of corporation, a C corporation or an S corporation. We are not going to go over C corporations today. The reason is, unless you are running a multi-million-dollar company and you are looking at bringing in huge value investors, like tens of millions of dollars in investors, you don't need a C corporation. It is a ton of work. It is a ton of paperwork. The red tape is sort of out of control. I have a lot of people who say, I want to file for a C corporation in Delaware. We do it, and then they're like, I changed my mind. Can we scale it back? I just want to do an S corporation. I don't actually need that. So we are not going to go into that today. But if you do have questions, get a hold of me. I will certainly be happy to answer them. Both of these types of businesses will protect your personal assets from liability. They are both separate entities, which means that they're their own separate item. So it's completely separate from you as a person, which is why it then gives you that liability protection. But to complete the process of having that separate entity, you have to do the state filing and you have to get that EIN. You also have to do annual filings. It depends on the state what those annual filings look like. The filings for Maryland are super involved, and I think last time I checked it was $300 a year. For Virginia, it's very minimal. It's you check a few boxes and you pay $50 a year. Do it. It's totally worth the $50. Okay, taxes. Both are generally pass-through entities. So you're generally just filing a schedule on top of your own personal income tax. There are additional benefits of an S corporation, but like I have down here at the bottom, an LLC can elect to be treated as an S corporation for tax purposes. Now the reason, let me see if I went into that on the next slide. Here we go. We'll talk about that down here. Okay, the differences, members versus shareholders. Okay, so whoops, members versus shareholders. So LLCs have members, corporations have shareholders, because corporations don't have an ownership interest, they have ownership shares. It sort of amounts to the same thing because it can still be percentages, but it's members versus shares. In an LLC, you could theoretically have 1 million members. A corporation, as you can see here, an S corporation has to have 100 or fewer shareholders. Now, if you're publicly traded, I know y'all are thinking, how can it only be 100 or fewer? Because Google has who knows how many shareholders. That's a publicly traded corporation, totally different animal. Citizenship or residency. So you can be a member of an LLC no matter where you live, no matter where you're a resident of. But for corporations, you have to be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien. So this turns into issues sometimes. There are some people that try to get around this by saying, well, I'm going to form an LLC with my friend who lives in Colombia, we'll say. I don't know why that was the first place that came to my mind. I'm going to form an LLC with my friend who's in Colombia. That LLC is then going to own this corporation. It doesn't work like that. The U.S. government gets super mad, and it's frankly just not worth it. If you're going to do something like that, you want to look at, you're going to have to deal with international business laws, and you're going to have to figure out what makes sense in order for you to be an owner, or for someone in another country to be an owner of a C corporation. C corporations can do things like that, but there are additional stringent regulations on it. Again, if that's something that you're interested in, get a hold of me and we'll go through that separately. Okay, so this is the benefit of the S corporation. The benefit of the S corporation is, as long as you're paying yourself what's called a reasonable salary, which is super subjective. So as long as it's something that you would think would be reasonable based on either the profits that you're making or the industry that you're in, or the amount of time that you're spending on the business. So it's really, it has to be you have to sort of be able to identify what reasonable might be, but it's not set in stone. Then any additional lump sum payments. So say you're paying yourself in your operating agreement or in your bylaws, say you're paying yourself X amount per month, and that's your salary. And then on top of that, say you're allowing that if quarterly profits exceed a certain amount, then you can take a certain percentage of those quarterly profits as an additional dividend, as an additional payment, or as a bonus, however you want to word it. That additional payment on top of the salary, you're not subjected to self-employment tax. So that's a huge benefit if you're making enough to pay yourself a reasonable salary and also to have additional funds potentially left for dividends. Now, the reason it's set up like that is because it's allowing for people that are in a business where the profits fluctuate a lot. So you're not able to say, hey, I'm making more, I can pay myself more, because you don't know. So that way you're still paying that self-employment tax on your usual salary. And sometimes you may be able to pay yourself more, and sometimes you may not. So the government sort of gives people a break on those additional payments. All right, so tax benefits, this is sort of what we just went over. S corporation totally wins when it comes to tax treatment, but that's why, like I was saying earlier, as long as there's no reason you can't have an LLC, then you can really have the best of both worlds. The benefit of the LLC is really that you don't have corporate formalities. You don't have to keep meeting minutes. You don't have to, your annual filings are way less stringent. So annual filings for corporations are much more involved and much more expensive. Annual filing requirements for an LLC are easy and cheap. And it also allows you a lot more freedom, a lot more leeway in running an LLC. So as long as you can come up with terms that you and your business partners, if you have partners, as long as you can come up with terms that y'all can agree to, you can put them in the operating agreement. That operating agreement can say whatever you want. For the corporation, you have some confines that you have to sort of work within. And like I said, you do have to keep meeting minutes. You have to have annual meetings. You have to make sure that the voting rights are in order, that you've prescribed what different classes of shares you have. So it's just a little bit more involved, which if you have investors is much more attractive to investors because they want that accountability. But if it's just you and your spouse or you and your friend, then an LLC is much easier to run, which is why I said, the best of both worlds. And this is for me too. This is how I have my own setup. The best of both worlds is to have an LLC, but be treated as an S corporation for tax purposes. That way you can pay yourself that reasonable salary, but then you can also be, paying yourself additional dividends. So here down at the bottom, we have the information about a meaningful salary. $100,000 is not the line in the sand. $100,000 is just a fairly recent case that Virginia decided on. They said $100,000 was absolutely a reasonable salary. This was for a huge corporation. This was a situation where, or this was for a very profitable corporation, S corporation, where someone was arguing that it wasn't a meaningful salary, and that additional money should have, or additional taxes should have been imposed. So they said that $100,000 was a meaningful salary. There are a lot of people who pay themselves less than that and still are able to benefit from those additional quarterly dividends or quarterly bonuses. So don't think you have to meet that minimum. It really just comes down to, like I said earlier, balancing, what does your industry say is reasonable? What is it? What do you think it makes sense for the amount of hours that you're working, for the type of business that you're running? So it's really a very subjective test. All right, same thing about saving yourself 15% on the employment taxes, reasonable salary. Glassdoor is a great place to go. I think there are other places now. I think Indeed does some of that explanation of, what average salaries are. I don't know how on target they are, but at least it's a place where you could go and sort of get an idea of, what you think you might be able to swing as compared to Glassdoor, to give yourself an idea of whether or not it makes sense to file for that S corporation election. Contracts. All right, contracts are one of my favorite things to do. They really are. It sounds crazy, but they are. Okay, do I need a written and signed contract? I have people ask me this all the time. Like, hey, but it's just my friend Joe down the street, and he's got a business and I've got a business and we want to work together. You and Joe still need a contract. And the reason is because things can go south between you and Joe real quick. So it doesn't have to be a 200-page contract. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It does need to have the general terms. I think that's what's coming up. I guess we're not to terms yet. It does need to have some general terms, which I think we get to in a couple of slides. Otherwise, you're scrolling through text messages trying to figure out, what did he say we were going to do about this? Or, what did he say he wanted if I couldn't get him his first choice? Did he want something else? Did he want a refund? Were we going to, try to work something else out? you don't want to have to do that. You don't want to have to go through 40,000 text messages or emails or whatever to figure out what it is the deal was supposed to be. Just get it in writing. Can you wait and have them drafted later? I have people come to me frequently that say, I didn't have time to get a contract drafted. I pulled something off the internet, things went south. Look at this and tell me how to fix it. Can I fix it? Sometimes, but not always. Is it a good idea to do that? No. If you're going to pull something off the internet, at least have an attorney look at it beforehand and have them say, because I will be honest with people. I will tell them, you don't really need me to write you a contract. This is fine. Fill the information in, call it a day. But the last thing you want to do is get a contract that's meant for something else and then try to manipulate it to say what you want. And then you end up with a bunch of information in there that either doesn't apply, and so the court doesn't know how to interpret it, or that totally says the opposite of what you want to do. So make sure you have an attorney review something. Find somebody you trust. Make sure they'll be honest with you and say, this is totally fine for what you want, or this is not going to get you there, and it's probably, sorry about that, and it's probably going to put you in a situation that you don't want to be in. You also want to think about what the value of your assets are, because if something happens with that contract and somebody tries to sue you, your business assets are what they're coming after. So you want to make sure, again, going back to the beginning, you want to make sure that you've got those assets in the right place, that they're titled in the business and not in your personal name. You want to make sure that you have that insurance policy that will cover if somebody files suit against you. Is the other party going to be offended? Again, this goes back to you and Joe, right? Okay, is Joe going to be upset because you asked him to put something in writing? No. If Joe really is a business owner and he's running his own business, he knows he needs to have contracts too. This is just something that any business owner needs to get used to. Everything has to be in writing. Even I have a guy who runs his own business that does the gutter work on my house, and he's going to replace some rotted wood and do some aluminum capping. And you know what? He sent me a contract. He sent me a written contract for me to sign. Was it the best thing I'd ever seen? No. Did it get the job done and make me at least feel a little bit better about the fact that it said what I paid him and what he was supposed to do for that money? Absolutely. So generally speaking, no. And explain it to people. This is to protect both of us. This is so, I can't pull one over on you, you can't pull one over on me, and if something goes wrong, we're both protected. Nobody's going to lose everything on this deal. Contract drafting. I love to draft contracts. I love to draft contracts because you can be super creative about stuff. People come to me and say, what does a typical contract on this say? What does a typical contract on that say? There are some sort of standard provisions, but there really is no typical contract because people are so different. People's businesses are different. The way people run their businesses are different. It's all so different that it's hard to say, okay, we'll just throw this together and it'll probably be fine. Or, hey, let me use this from one that I did last week for somebody who does something sort of similar. What I like is when people get creative about things, or when people know exactly what they want. When people know, hey, if this happens, then we want to do this. Or if this happens, then we want to do this. Or even come to me and say, I'm worried that this might happen. What do I do? And then we can come up with a solution for how we want things to be handled together, which then makes it a better contract, which goes to sort of my third bullet point here. When in doubt, be more specific. So if there are things that you're concerned about, if there are things that you've seen happen as an employee in somebody else's business, if there are things that you've seen happen with a prior customer or another subcontractor or prime, if there's any situation that you are coming into this contract negotiation or contract discussion with, and any situation that you're coming into that with knowledge of that you think may potentially affect how you want to do business going forward, definitely do that. Definitely put it in there. We can go over it together. I've drafted so many contracts. I like to come up with creative new ways to handle things. Most business attorneys do, actually. Let's go back. What can a contract do? So this is where I said we're going to talk about terms, right? A contract is paper that says this is what is going to be done, and this is how much is or given, and this is how much is going to be paid for it, right? So you want the price of the goods or services, the terms of the payment. Is it going to be paid up front? Is it going to be in installments? What happens if installments aren't made? What happens if goods or services aren't delivered? Obligations of each party. Who has to pay and who has to provide goods or services? Rights of each party. This goes back to what happens if they don't pay, what happens if they don't deliver. Then what is the other party entitled to? What triggers termination? This is a big one. I get people bringing me contracts all the time. These are the internet contracts, and they're saying, I signed this, things aren't going well, I want to get out, what do I do? And then there's no termination clause, or the termination clause says that the other party can terminate, but not my client or prospective client. So you want to make sure that either party can terminate and that there are reasonable terms in there for termination. You want to make sure that there has to be notice given, that the party who's terminating has to allow the other party to make good on their end if that's desired. Do you want to force someone to provide goods or services even if the relationship goes sour, which frankly I generally don't recommend. If it's a sour relationship, just terminate the agreement, cut your losses and move on somewhere else. And then that process for termination. Is there supposed to be a written letter, which don't do a written letter, okay? There's no paper trail there. A lot of people get these internet contracts, and if they do have a termination clause that says, notice must be sent by USPS, don't do that. Send an email. Send an email with a read receipt. That way you've got a way to track when you sent the email, who you sent the email to, if they saw it. If they click no on the read receipt, there's only so much you can do, but you can at least make sure that each of you has written down where you want these notices of termination to be sent. It should have the name for the person that it should be sent to, the email address, or physical address if you really want to do mail. But you want to have a process laid out so that it's very clear how you terminate the contract, because that's the biggest problem I see is something goes wrong and nobody knows how to get out of the contract, and you never want to be in that situation. What can a contract not do? You can't make somebody sign it, and it can't be grossly unfair. What does grossly unfair mean? So if you're saying, I will give you, I don't know why, but in law school, the example was a fuzzy cough drop at the bottom of your purse. It's super gross. I don't know why that was the example, but it was. I will give you this fuzzy cough drop. You have to pay me $1 million. Is that a fair contract? No. Is the court going to uphold that? No, absolutely not. Neither party can be forced to sign. Okay, so what does that mean? Nobody can have a gun to your head. Also, nobody can say, hey, if you don't sign this, I'm going to destroy your business. Anything where you're trying to threaten someone or harass someone, you can't do that. The court's not going to uphold that contract. Non-competes. Non-competes are a tough one. Okay, so non-competes, a lot of people want to put them in their contract. Like, I don't want this person to be able to start a business or work for somebody else, if they quit. So some professions just don't allow non-competes at all. Things like lawyers, doctors, tax accountants, CPAs, financial planners, things like that, because that's their only livelihood. Whereas, if you work in retail, you could theoretically go get another job in retail at another, at another shop. So there are some professions where you just can't have a non-compete. You also have to be really careful and make them limited. They have to be very limited. So in Virginia, you really should keep it to, a small mileage range, like, 30, 40 miles, especially in Northern Virginia, where 30 or 40 miles could take you hours, depending on traffic. And you also want to limit it to a specific amount of time. Usually a year is okay within that limited mileage range. Anything longer than that, and you're probably going to get a big no from the court. They just won't uphold it. Additional contract provisions. Okay, so we already talked about the non-competition. Non-disclosure and non-solicitation are generally included. You hear people say all the time, I had to sign an NDA. I had to sign an NDA. That's a non-disclosure agreement. An NDA usually has 3 parts. It usually has, which are my first 3 like big bullet points: a non-disclosure, a non-competition, and a non-solicitation. A non-disclosure says, hey, we hired you, we are fine giving you all this information about the systems we use, the processes we use, but you can't tell anybody else. That's fairly common. I have had $100 million trade secret infringements where somebody violated non-disclosure agreements. Non-disclosures courts are very serious about. Non-competition, they could generally take them or leave them. It's sort of a toss-up as to whether or not they're going to enforce them, frankly. Non-disclosures, they're very serious about it. Usually a non-disclosure says you can't ever, until the end of time, disclose anything. Some of them, depending on the area of practice or the industry, or depending on the specific contract, may have an amount of time where you can't disclose anything, and then after that it may be fine. Or if there's a press release that's going to go out at some point, then it says can't be disclosed until after the press release, or until after it's been made public knowledge. Non-competition, we already talked about. Courts don't like them, but generally if you can limit them, they will uphold them anyway. Non-solicitation, courts are totally on board with these also. It says, hey, don't steal our customers. So basically, if you're working for somebody and you have a non-solicitation agreement, it says you cannot go out and tell somebody, hey, I started my own business. Why don't you come over here with me and I'll do you a better deal? You can't actively take contracts or customers or clients or whatever the term is in your specific industry. You can't take them from your prior employer. Now, there has been some wiggle room as far as notification goes. So if you are the employer, you want to say you cannot contact them at all. If you are the employee, you want it to say you cannot solicit them, because you can't. Then that leaves some wiggle room for you to say, I'm not soliciting them, I'm notifying them. I'm notifying them that I no longer work there and that I have my own business. I wasn't trying to get them, I was just telling them that I wasn't there. Work made for hire. So this is another one that's really popular in software. This is super popular in software and also in engineering. So basically, if you develop something, if you develop a product or an algorithm or a code or anything like that, then anything you develop is owned by the company as opposed to by the employee or the independent contractor. So as the employee or the independent contractor, you don't love it. As the employer, it's great for business. Okay, things to be careful of. Be careful in contract negotiations. Again, I have people that will sign a contract and then say, hey, I signed this. Things aren't going great. What do I do? Don't do that. Don't sign something without having an attorney read it. I always encourage people to have an attorney look at stuff. It doesn't have to be me. Pick any attorney, but have a business attorney look at it. Don't have your cousin's friend who is a family law attorney read your business contract. They don't know what they're looking at. You want to make sure that you have a business attorney looking at your business contract. Conversely, if you're getting a divorce, don't have me look at it. I don't do divorces. So it's, you want to make sure that you're finding the right person, the right attorney to look at things. The reason you want to have somebody look at it, I actually just did a contract negotiation 2 weeks ago for a client of mine, and he was getting a new job, and there were some, interesting provisions that should have been in there that weren't, that he was told were in there, but that weren't. So we had to go through that, and I was able to work with the HR department and make sure that we included the items that should have been included, but while using wording that was maybe a little bit softer than what I would have initially chosen. So don't be afraid to ask somebody to negotiate with you on a contract. The worst they can do is say no. And usually bigger companies are pretty willing to work with people on stuff. So definitely don't be afraid to, to reach out to somebody, have them take a look at your contracts, and try to have them work with the company that you're wanting to sign a contract with. Okay, employment agreements and manuals. I'm not going to go into depth on this. Just have them. That's basically what it comes down to. Can you have an employment agreement that you use for everybody? Sort of. So you can have a basic template that you can use. You will need to alter it. That goes back to the contract negotiations from the previous slide. You will need to alter it, most likely. You will need to alter it for employees depending on what position you're hiring them in, what level you're hiring them at, if there are specific concessions they need made, if there are specific concerns you have about their behavior. So there's always going to be something that you need to work with them on. Employment manuals. So that is something that you only do once, really. And then, as situations come up, you may need to modify it. But that's really, sick leave, vacation days, how to handle maternity leave. You not only do you want to make sure that you're being fair enough that you are able to retain employees, but you also want to make sure that you're following the federal and state guidelines. Again, hopefully this is something that you only have to deal with once, but there are some situations where minor modifications need to be made. Employees versus independent contractors. The IRS has been very clear about their test. The test can be difficult to figure out. I will tell you, I have worked as an independent contractor for other firms before. Basically, when I have worked for a firm as an independent contractor, they give me the clients that they want me to work for, they give me the information, and I do it how I want. I draft the documents how I want. I interact with the client when and how I want. I set my own schedule. They're not sending me, they're not training me. They're not trying to give me hardware. They're not giving me a computer. It's all, I'm doing everything on my schedule. It's just that they're giving me the work to do. So that's, and then on top of that, the financial aspect. So I was making at that point a percentage of the flat fee for the projects that I was working. So if a flat fee of, $2,000 came in and I was getting 50% of that, then, that would be my portion of that particular thing. And there's no benefits, no nothing. So that's really what you want to look at is, are you training the people? If you're training them, definitely employee. Are you providing benefits? Definitely employee. The situation that some people get into is, well, I feel like I need to train them and I need to make sure that they do what I want when I want them to, but I'm just going to treat them as a 1099. okay, well, you can't treat them as an employee in that you want to have more control, but then say, well, I also don't want to give you benefits. So I'm going to call you a 1099. So you have to just be really careful when you're hiring people, that you're following those guidelines. If you're not sure, call a lawyer and ask them. We will all be able to tell you. Business plans and estate plans. Okay, so I actually started out doing business formations and business planning. Well, I started out in litigation like, 100 years ago, it feels like. But then once I had my son, I decided I wanted to see him sometimes. So I started my own business and just decided I was going to do transactional work so I could be home more. I started doing business formation and business planning. And then I found myself in a position saying, hey, you've done this great business plan. We've set everything up. You've got this beautiful operating agreement. What happens if you pass? And so we build that into the operating agreement. And I'm saying, okay, you need to have the exact same thing written in your estate plan. So your will or your revocable living trust, it all needs to say the same thing. You need to mention in your durable power of attorney who gets to manage the business if you're incapacitated, which is also in the operating agreement. So I ended up building people's estate plans because they needed to protect their businesses. So whatever you have in your business documents needs to be in your estate plan. Whatever you have in your estate plan needs to be in your business documents. They have to work together, or you're leaving something out. You're leaving out a big piece of the puzzle, which could then, cause huge problems for not only the business, but whomever you're leaving your assets to whenever you pass as well. All right, now what do? Now we talk to people. Talk to your business partner, find a mentor who's in the same business or who runs a successful business that you think could give you advice on running the business. Talk to, your spouse, if you think that they have good input on stuff like that. I run lots of stuff by my husband, stuff that he probably doesn't love sometimes, but, I'm thinking about updating my website. What do you think? Or, any time that you have somebody that you trust, that you value their opinion, that you think is going to be honest with you, talk to them about it. Consultations. I offer free 30-minute consultations. A lot of us do. I like to talk to somebody and get an idea of what it is they're interested in before I ask them to pay me. And then flat fees. A lot of attorneys now, actually most of my colleagues that are up here in Northern Virginia and in Maryland are doing things on flat fee. If you can find an attorney that you trust that does business formation or business contracts or whatever on a flat fee, do that. The reason that I started doing that is the reason that I'm encouraging you to hire somebody who does it, which is you don't want to get charged for every single phone call if you just have a question about something that's in a contract draft. So definitely, find an attorney that you like, find an attorney that you're comfortable talking to, because you're going to have to tell them all about your business. You're probably going to have to tell them a little bit about what your family looks like so they can account for what happens when you pass and who it should go to. Find somebody you're comfortable with, and, make sure that you give them all the information that they need. And speaking of finding somebody you're comfortable with and reaching out, here's my information. If you are looking for an attorney and you don't think I'm the right fit, feel free to ask me for a referral. I don't get offended. I'm not for everybody. Everybody's not for me. That's okay. I have lots of contacts up here. I am happy to, find somebody who's a good fit. If you do think I'm a good fit for you, great. Give me a call. Also, though, I just like to answer questions. So like I said at the beginning, if you have questions about something that I went over in the slides, something that I didn't go over in the slides that you were wondering about, feel free to reach out by email or phone and ask away. That's it for me.
Okay. Well, thank you, Melanie. And
Sure.
if anyone has any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. Do you have time for a couple of questions, Melanie? Is that
Sure.
okay? I know we're running a little bit late. I don't want to keep you too long. I
That's
know
all right.
okay. Great. Well, I had one question myself.
Sure.
You were talking about non-competition
Hmm.
clauses and that kind of thing. So I've seen companies that have like non-competition clauses of 5 years for like 30 miles. Does that generally not hold up?
No, it generally doesn't. The longest I've seen hold up in Virginia is 3 years, and it was a very small radius. I think it was only like 15 or 20 miles. Um, it may have even, it may have actually even only been limited to 2 counties. But yeah, I mean, I have seen Virginia courts repeatedly strike down a 5 year clause.
Okay. That's probably very good for a lot of people to know. I have some friends who
Yeah,
would be really reassured to hear that. Okay.
yeah, courts just don't like them in general, and they're not apt to, make to force additional restrictions on people or keep people from working. They want people to work.
Right, right. That absolutely makes sense. Um, I did have a question about investing as well. You mentioned that
Sure.
investors generally don't like LLCs. Why
Hmm.
is that?
So the reason that investors generally prefer a corporation, whether it's an S corporation or a C corporation, is because there is that corporate formal red tape. They want to see meeting minutes. They want to see annual reports. They want to see your formal business plan. They want all of the information. They want it easily accessible. They want it, so generally if you've got a corporation, you've got a binder. Okay, you've got this corporate binder. It's got tabs for meeting minutes. It's got tabs for annual reports. It's got tabs for profit and loss statements. They want that. Investors want to see all that.
Okay. All right. And we had one other question. If you are not sure if you want to have investors and you
Hmm.
think like maybe I'll start my corporation and then I'll come back to it, like I'll think about it and change it later. How easy is it to
Hmm.
change your policies to accommodate that?
So generally, if you're not sure at first, I recommend just setting it up as an LLC, and then you can convert it from an LLC to an S corporation later. It's super easy. It's like a $25 filing fee and a piece of paper.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah, the only thing that sort of is a problem there is that you have to take the operating agreement and sort of toss that out the window and write it and draft your bylaws and your shareholder agreement. But the filing with the state corporation commission is nothing.
Hmm, okay. It seems like it would be more complicated than that. That's good to know.
I know it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I don't think I saw any other questions. Let me just, oh, here we got
Okay.
one more.
Okay.
How difficult is it to change the business address? Say if
It's
you
super
started as
easy.
home-based. Okay. Yeah.
It's super easy. You don't even have to pay for that on the Virginia SEC website. You just log on and it's an electronic form. You just fill it out and hit submit.
Oh, okay. Uh, Hopefully that answers your question, Christina. Are there any other questions? Yes. Okay, great. Anyone else? No? Okay, I think that's about it then. So thank you so much,
Okay.
Melanie, for coming in.
Yeah. It's been a
Um,
pleasure.
yeah, and again, everyone, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, probably in a couple of days. And then Melanie, do you mind sending me the PowerPoint and I can send it out to all the
Yeah.
people that requested it? Okay,
Yep. I'll just
great.
go ahead and save it as a PDF, and you can send it like that.
Okay, sounds great. All right, well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for
Yeah,
coming
it's
and
been my
asking
pleasure. Thanks,
questions.
everyone.
Yeah. All right, everyone, have a good night.